Bienvenidos. Welcome to the Careers Without Connections podcast, the podcast for underrepresented professionals who are building their careers from scratch and navigating unfamiliar spaces. I'm your host, Gianna Linares. I'm a first generation graduate and a first generation professional. And this whole entire episode, it's really just a pilot episode intended to give some context as to what is this podcast? Why am I making an entire podcast on this topic? And give a little background about me and my lived experiences that have helped me build this, of course, growing library of knowledge and lessons that I'm able to then come and share and reflect on and about what I've learned and how I personally have been able to build my own career from scratch and navigate being a first generation bachelor's student, the first person in my family to get a master's. Really, I feel like the best way for me to explain and articulate on all those things that I just listed is really just to tell a story, which is my story, essentially. So I grew up in a small town in Oregon. I grew up thinking that everywhere I went, I was going to be one of a few. I did not grow up around a lot of Latinos or really any non-white populations. I wasn't well traveled as a kid, so I just assumed that anywhere that I went in the US, it was going to be very, very homogenous. Now that I'm a little bit older and I'm able to look back and reflect on that situation or that experience more so, should I say, it definitely impacted the way that I perceived myself and my identity. I definitely shied away from embracing my culture when I was younger and definitely paying the consequences for that now with my fluency in Spanish. Like I'm very fluent, but anytime my culture did come out either through what I was eating or wearing or how I would present myself in a certain way, I would get comments. And of course, especially when you're young and in settings like middle school and high school, you don't really want to be left out of the wolf pack, you know? From a pretty young age, I knew I wanted to relocate. I knew I wanted to spread my wings and leave Oregon. And I told myself after I finish school, I'm going to leave. So I started at community college mainly because of financial constraints. That was definitely a reoccurring theme along my undergraduate and graduate journey was financial constraints, meaning I had to work 20 to 30 hours a week to on top of being a full-time student to make sure that I had money to pay for school and pay for my rent and things like that. So I stayed at home almost my first 2 years and went to community college. And my advisor says, hey, there's really no more classes for you to take. If you're ready to start taking classes at university, now's the perfect time. And I was so excited. I'd been itching for that university experience. I remember seeing people that I graduated high school with moving out and having the dorm experience and moving out of state. And also thinking to the back of my head, like, wow, they're really racking up those student loans, or they must be fortunate to have someone to help them cover those things. I remember there was this one guy in my hometown who he already had like $10,000 in incurred in debt after his very, very first term of school. And I always was raised around the principles of be very careful with your money, and money is challenging to come by. You have to work hard to get your bag, right? An important detail to this story is this is right before March of 2020, right before COVID. So I fully, like, my dad drops me off in the U-Haul. I have a job lined up at a coffee shop. And at the time, I'm like, oh man, 3 weeks remote. What the heck? Like, that sucks. And then that 3 weeks ended up turning into 4 full terms. So I not only was navigating being a first generation student, but I was also navigating having that disconnect from being physically on campus. And that really made it even more challenging for me to know and be aware about the types of resources that were available for students in general. Because there's a lot that they automatically take out of your tuition. Like they have career resources, career readiness, much more comprehensive like student advisory team to kind of help you figure out any hiccups you may encounter while you are going through school or anything like that. By the time I actually go in person at university, it's my senior year. And at this point, everyone's made their friends already. And the first couple of terms, we were still wearing masks because Oregon had the mask mandate longer than other states. It was still a very important time in my life where I took away a lot of important lessons and had a lot of character growth and development and learned a lot about what it meant to be leaving university and potentially entering the workforce. But I knew that I wanted to get my master's, and I decided I wanted to get my master's relatively late compared to other students. I decided I wanted to pursue my master's degree almost the end of my junior year, which, if you know anything about looking for a master's program and applying to them, it's a lengthy process. But again, kind of going back to I don't want to spend a ton of money on out of state. What are my options? I knew I was just going to stay local and do grad school locally. It made it very challenging that I had done my classes remote because when it came time to ask for letters of recommendation and get plugged into knowledge about the program at my school, or get knowledge about grad programs in general, it was very challenging because I wasn't super aware of who could I talk to or even what questions to ask. I remember that was something I really struggled with as a student was I know I'm missing something because I'm confused, but what exactly should I be asking and how do I word it? And I'm also worried about sounding dumb. And especially sometimes I would ask questions and I typically wasn't met with any sort of super negative or unwelcoming responses, but sometimes the responses that I would receive or I could just kind of infer that I was like, "Oh," I would feel like it was kind of like common sense, but no matter where you are, if you don't know something, you don't know until you know it. So I started essentially cold emailing a bunch of professors that I had done well in their classes during the remote COVID period, and being like, "Hey, I'm interested in grad school. I did well in your class. Can we talk? And maybe you can write me a letter of recommendation." And I was essentially getting letters of recommendation for grad school off of like 15-minute one time conversations because I didn't have anyone around me telling me the importance of building rapport with my professors, especially if I wanted to go to grad school. And again, I just wasn't super knowledgeable about the resources that did exist at my university and how to get in touch with them either. I feel like those resources are super underutilized, but I also feel like at my university, their outreach efforts weren't anything that was going to really get in front of a student, especially a first gen student's visual, I guess you could say, because a lot of us were pretty busy with working. A lot of us work a lot and go to school full time, or we have familial obligations, or more often than not, we don't have the luxuries of being financially supported or even having mom and dad or someone in mom and dad's circle to ask a question. And we have to kind of jump through the hoops of who can I talk to? How do I make a connection with them? How can I get them to be willing to have that conversation with me like a complete stranger who's a student? Yeah, thankfully, I ended up meeting in one of my classes a professor who ended up being my mentor later on when I was in grad school. But I had told her, "Hey, I'm really interested in applying for this graduate program," which it was called 3 p.m. Planning Public Policy and Management. "I'm really interested in the public administration, public policy stuff. Can we talk about it?" And she was excited and she was super receptive. And she never once made me feel like I was asking dumb questions or it made me feel small in any way. She ended up also writing me a letter of recommendation and just helping me feel more knowledgeable and comfortable and prepared to even be applying for this graduate program. And I remember I would literally sit and stare at my letter of intent, the letter that you write explaining why do I want to go to grad school? Why should you let me in for hours? And now I look back on that paper, I have it saved, and I'm like, this is okay. Like, I think the story itself was good of, being a first generation student. And I did a ton of research and I was really clear on where I intended to take it. But I look at that letter now and I'm just like, you were so stressed about this for what? So I end up getting accepted into grad school. And this same professor that I was mentioned earlier, she was kind of one of the first people that I ever encountered going through my undergraduate degree that became like an actual ongoing mentor and a source for me to go to frequently with questions or ideas and get advice and guidance from her. But this same professor also ended up being my first opportunity to get funding for my master's program. To backtrack a little bit, there were these positions in grad school called graduate employment positions, or GEs for short, which if you got one, you would get complete tuition waiver and a stipend for however long you're contracted for the job. Some of them were just one term, some of them were a whole year ongoing. When I first got accepted into my grad program, I thought I was going to continue being a waitress all throughout grad school because that type of job was really the most efficient and effective way time wise for me to get the money that I needed, but have time to study and do my homework. But these jobs opened up and I actually didn't get a single one my first round. At the time, my resume was just barista, server. I had like purple on it. Like it was the like example of this is how you don't do a resume. I had actually gone to the professional development and career services person. I sent her an email. I was like, hey, I got accepted into the grad program. I'm Gianna, by the way. And like, can you help me? I've never applied to a more traditional white collar job. And I'm just not sure how to work with what I've got. And we went back and forth, and she gave me great feedback, but I didn't get anything that first round. One of the jobs that I had applied for reopened, and it was with that professor who I had mentioned. I took her class right before I finished my undergrad. I went back to the professional development advisor. I said, hey, this job reopened. What can I do differently this time to get this job? And she said, oh, you know the professor, right? Like, you took a class with her. Why don't you just reach out and ask her if there's anything about the job that you should know and be aware of? And I didn't think much of it at the time, but this person who told me to do that, she had been with the university for a very long time. She knew exactly how the selection process went. And come to find out, a lot of it was really just this professor saying, I want to work with this person. Like, yes, the application, the resume was important, but if a professor said, I want to work with this student, I want them to be my GE, then the likelihood of you getting that position was 99.99%, right? And so I reach out to her and I say, hey, like, remember me? I'm Gianna. I really think I'm a great fit for this role. Is there anything important you think I should know? And she was like, no, but thanks for reaching out. And I get an email a couple of days later saying, hey, we want to offer you this job. I already had my schedule out, my serving schedule out, everything. And I went back to my general manager. I said, hey, can I come back after this job? She said, yeah, of course. But that first job really opened a lot of doors for me. And I was able to continue to keep getting more GEs. That alone, like one term of grad school covered, was huge for me, a big weight off of my shoulders. And as that term progressed, I kept applying for other GEs and wasn't hearing anything. And then a few weeks before, I'm literally already in contact with the manager for my serving job, expecting to go back to serving. I get an email from a professor in a different department that I had literally just sent him a cold email before I got my very first G, before I even started the school year. And he was like, "Hey, are you still looking for a GE for this next term? I had a position open up." I was like, "Yeah, absolutely. Do I know anything about your department? No. However, have I ever taught a class? No, but I want a tuition waiver." And of course, I didn't say that. I was just like, "Yeah, I'm available." And he was like, "Okay, great. Here's the job. Congratulations." I've officially started this new GE, and a position opens up that's going to be a full year of tuition waiver the following year. And I wanted this job so bad. I felt like the job description, the title itself was Multicultural Services GE, and I really literally felt like the position had been created for me. I did every single possible thing in my power to get this job. I went back to the professional development career services person. I said, "Hey, what can I do to make my chances at getting this job as strong as I possibly can?" And she was like, "Okay, let's go through your resume again. You need to practice your interview. Who has that job right now? Reach out to them, see if they'll do an informational interview." Reached out to the guy, he ignored me. So when I saw him on campus, I flagged him down politely. I was like, "Hey, can we please talk?" And I ended up getting a little bit of information out of him through an email. And another thing this advisor had told me, she had told me, like, "Hey, why don't you go find your interview spot before so you don't feel nervous?" And I was like, "Okay, yeah, good idea." And I didn't know it at the time, but I ended up running into the person that ended up becoming my supervisor for that year-long GE. And he was like, "Are you okay? Are you lost?" I was like, "Yeah, I have like an interview here. I just want to make sure I know where it is." And that really showed him that I was very serious about that job. I remember I interviewed too with like five different people, like a total I practiced probably like 30 times with a collection of my mom, my friends, my school friends, my professional career services advisor, and they ended up giving me that G. And at this point, I have 5 out of 6 of my graduate terms open. And I am so tired. It's spring term of my first year. I've been learning a new job every 10 weeks, applying to a bunch of other stuff, trying to get funding, navigating being the first person in my entire family to get a master's degree. And one more position opens up that I almost don't apply for. But I'm like, "Hey, I've already spoken to this professor. Let me apply." So I interviewed for the job. I remember telling my mentor, I don't think I got it. Like I did my best, but I just don't feel like the interview went that well. I ended up getting an email the next day offering me the job. And it was a great experience. I got to work with a professor who was also a first generation student, also Latino, also raised by immigrants. And that was the first time in my life that I ever had a mentor who had such similar lived experiences as me. And it really gave me such a good support and reference of like knowledge and guidance and mentorship that I didn't know was possible. It's so much easier to give someone advice when you've been exactly where they are. So he was kind of able to anticipate my needs and anticipate any things that I maybe was having a challenge with. I ended up asking him at the end of the job, like, "Hey, why did you hire me?" Like, I didn't feel like I interviewed that well. And he was like, "Oh, I remembered when you came to me a couple months back and you set up a appointment with me with my booking link and we met and you said, 'Hey, I'm interested in doing a research role. Do you have any opportunities?' And I didn't at the time. And when an opportunity opened up and it was in the form of a GE, I remembered your initiative. So at that point, I had officially gotten my entire master's degree funded, huge, huge weight off of my shoulders. And I'm able to graduate with my master's 100% debt free. At this point, I'm ready to leave, right? I'm like, okay, I've been applying thinking about a bunch of different cities. Nothing's landing. I'm graduating into one of the worst job markets possible. So finally, I'm just like, you know what? I'm just going to show up and see what happens. That's kind of just what I've been doing all throughout grad school is saying, hey, this is who I am. Can we talk? Is there an opportunity? Let me just physically go there and see what happens. So I ended up choosing Philadelphia because I wanted to try out the Northeast. I go there, I don't know a single person, no job. I'd been like reaching out to people the month before I was moving, like telling them like, "Hey, I'm coming from Oregon, like I'll be there on this day." And I get to Philly, I'm waitressing because I haven't found work and I need money to support myself and sustain myself while I'm in this new city. And it's a big city and cost of living is different. And I'm not a student anymore. And I don't have the types of discounts and access to cheaper housing and all these things that students typically get. So I end up cold networking my way into a position, an internship with Philadelphia City Council, with a council member that I was like, that's the person I want to work for. That's the person I want to be my boss. She was the only Latina elected official of the 17 elected members. And I was like, I want to work for her. And so I cold emailed, I interviewed, I waited, I followed up, and they finally are like, okay, hey, we'll get you an internship. We can do that for you. That's what we have available. So here I am across the country. I don't know anyone, my family, no support nearby me. And I'm still waitressing and I have an internship now. And I'm like, wow, I did not picture myself being in this position, having a master's degree, but this is an opportunity, right? This is a way to get my foot in the door. Within 2 months, I had an offer to move to full time. 3 months in, they moved me to full time policy analyst. From the start, from the time that I got to Philly, I knew that was not the city for me. So I slowly just grew more and distressed about being in an environment and being in a place that just wasn't a good fit for me. The job, too, if you would have asked me in grad school, where do you want to work? Who do you want to work for? What do you want your title to be? What do you want your job to be? I would have told you exactly what I was doing. But again, you don't know what you know until you know it. And that first job really taught me a lot about what I did really value in a work environment, in a job itself, and what I did not want to be anywhere near in my next role. I knew I wanted to leave Philly and return closer to my family again. So I start cold emailing a bunch of people in Atlanta because my mom is now she's left Oregon and she's close to Atlanta. So I start reaching out to people in June of 2025 and one thing leads to another, one connection leads me to this connection and I get my first job offer. After 4 months, I think, I ended up turning down that offer for my current role, which where I'm at now, I really wanted to work for this place. I had reached out early in June, called, followed up, set up an actual in-person coffee when I had gone to Atlanta. And they had ended up reaching out to me early fall saying, hey, are you still looking? We now have an open position. Would you like to apply? I ended up getting hired and I ended up moving to Atlanta in January of this year. I wanted to give that whole backstory because the common underlying theme and actions that I took was just putting myself out there and creating opportunities from scratch, like creating opportunities from emails, phone calls, coffee chats, word of mouth, like being connected to someone from someone else. And I think that that's something that a lot of underrepresented professionals, people who don't have connections, they don't have a ton of family resources around them in their immediate circles are really having to do because no one's going to hand you anything, especially in like the white collar, like the corporate workforce. Your connections are everything. It's not what you know, often it's who you know. And there's the saying, your network is your net worth. So I feel very, very strongly about the importance of being able to communicate your value, put yourself out there, and have the confidence to do it and not allow things like imposter syndrome, which is something that I still struggle to this day, to hold you back from those things. And so that is a culmination of, in short, in summary, of why I'm doing this podcast and the types of things that you can expect to hear more about. I have guests coming on that are also first generation professionals, some people who are immigrants, some people who started their businesses from scratch or have just navigated spaces that were full of people with backgrounds that were not at all like them, and they were still able to find success. That is, in a nutshell, what you can expect to hear on this podcast. And if you made it to the end of this, I want to thank you so much for listening, and stay tuned for my following episodes. And my inbox on all my social medias are always open for questions or comments or if you want to connect. Bye.